Hello and welcome to another great video from Gestalt IT. My name is Tom Hollingsworth. I'm one of the staff writers here, as well as being an event lead on the Tech Field Day series. You probably have seen some of our work in the networking and storage and cloud arenas. But one of the exciting things that we're doing for 2018 is we're bringing Tech Field Day to the security landscape. We are going to be talking about some great security things coming up next month. And when it comes to all things related to security and community, there's no better person to talk to about this than Mr. Jack Daniel, who joins me today. Jack, thank you for being a part of our interview today.
Happy to join you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Now, Jack, I've known you for a few years, and I think everybody in the security community has known you forever because you are probably one of the most well-known figures that I've ever seen in any community.
Yeah, I'm pretty well known. Well, my beard is extremely well known, and some people know me too.
Exactly. Yeah, it's always good when your beard has more Twitter followers than you do. Yeah. So, Jack, one of the reasons why you're so well known in security is that you're a founder of Security B-Sides, and you started that because there you saw a need in the community that needed to be addressed. How does B-Sides fill that need?
What happened was in 2009 we saw people whose talks were turned down from the bigger conferences. And a few of us kind of looked at it and we thought, well, that they get a lot of submissions. They can't take them all. And we kind of looked at why some might be turned down. It's like, they probably got a lot of those. It's like, that's not such a new idea. That one smells a little salesy. But then we saw this group of talks that were, that's going to be really interesting to maybe a few dozen people. The big conferences need to, especially the commercial ones, they need to fill seats. Having 12 or 14 people interested in a talk is not what works. Now, the 12 or 14 people might be really interested. And then there were other things that were that really wouldn't be as good as they could be if they were in a truly open and public venue. They would be a great thing for someplace where you could make sure there was no staff, no press, no recording, and then you could be really candid. And some of that was, bleeding edge research, and some of it was just telling the truth about working with some vendors in the spaces. And others just didn't quite fit. It's like, that's a great idea. It's just not a Black Hat or DEF CON talk. And it's like, that's too bad there's no place for these. And then a few of us kind of looked at each other, said, well, why don't we make it happen? And Chris Nickerson had rented a house. He said, why don't we just have some talks at the house? And the next thing you know, we had talks on things like what it's like to be a pen tester and go into being a manager and have to manage pen testers and understand why your last boss really hated you. That's not something that's going to fill a room, but as a lot of people's careers advance, that was very interesting to some people. There were talks, HD Moore gave his first talk on Warvox, and it was HD, so it was brilliant, but it was not polished, and it was fine for 40 people in a room. There was a great talk on our panel discussion that on gender issues and information security. And, it was many years before the big conferences addressed diversity in our industry, but, we tackled that. And then, a variety of other things. We weren't trying to change the world or create a new series. We just wanted to give voice to people that had interesting things to say. When we did that in a small venue, it led to much more conversational talks. And what came out of that was a real desire to do more of these, and it took off. I mean, there were a few the first calendar year, and there will be almost 100 globally in calendar year 2018.
Wow, that's quite a bit. That's a really good amount of B-sides. I mean, right before we were talking, you were telling me about all the ones that you've done this week.
I was in the past a couple of weeks. I've been at Augusta, Georgia, and Washington D.C. Both of those are pretty good sized events. I will be in Jacksonville, Florida in a couple of weeks. Tomorrow is, I'll miss one tomorrow, as we're recording this. The one in Dallas is kicking off. The one in Bordeaux, France is going, and I'm blanking on what the third one is. Oh, Connecticut. There's one up in Connecticut. But I can't believe I remember that because it takes a spreadsheet. We will hit 500 events by next spring sometime. Certainly by our 10th anniversary party in Las Vegas next year, we will be at probably 510, 520 events by then.
That's a lot. Now, one of the things that I'm kind of fascinated by is When it comes to the community, are you seeding these B-sides talks in places where like you want to grow a community, or are these community
No,
people that are coming to you?
this is all grassroots. We have a very low barrier to entry. We have a few simple rules. It's pretty straightforward. It's not as nowhere near as strict as a lot of franchise type events. It's very relaxed. When B-sides events are at their best, they reflect the local community and the local organizing team. So Las Vegas, none of us in the core team are local. Well, not many are local. So that one's a bit different. But the one in San Francisco feels like San Francisco. The one in Washington, D.C., there are recruiters looking for people with clearances there, as you might expect.
Hmm.
The ones coming up in Riyadh and Istanbul are going to be very different than the one that's coming up in Stuttgart, which is going to be really different than the one in Barcelona. And the one in Manchester in the UK is different than the one in London in the UK. It should reflect the community, and the overarching rule is be good to your community. So these people come to us with a brand name and a model that's pretty simple but highly flexible. And they say, "Hey, I'd like to do an event in." So I mentioned Barcelona. Their folks are trying to sort out Copenhagen right now. But in the past few weeks, I'll miss some of them. But I speak to 2 to 4 people a week at least. A lot of them don't happen. They find out that it's actually some work. But I've spoken to people. Mombasa is on the radar for the beginning of next month. Mombasa in Kenya. Nairobi is working on one that'll probably be a bigger one. It's a much bigger, higher, more technical city. The one in Mombasa is a city that I don't want to be disparaging of Mombasa, but they could use some help. They could use drawing things together. So I've spoken to people there. I've spoken to people in Johannesburg. I've spoken to people in Lahore in Pakistan, in Ahmedabad in Gujarat province in India. The ones in the US don't even register because it's those far-flung places that click. The folks in Guadalajara just had to lost their venue, so they've postponed. The folks in Tallahassee, there was that little hurricane thing, not little, and so they postponed it. And these things happen, but it's keeping them simple means if you can't do it, you let it slide, and then you do it when you can. The community gets together, you share some interesting information, and off you go.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking as someone who's an event organizer, I can tell you that there's a lot more work that goes into these things than people realize, and that kind of scares people at first because they're like, "Oh, well, we'll just get together and it'll be like a meetup, and we'll have some Cheez-Its and some Dr. Pepper." No, there's a lot more to it than that.
We stress keeping it simple, especially in the early years. And if people want to get creative, I start telling them some of what it takes to run 3,000 plus person events in B-sides Vegas with a team that's been together for years, including actual event management professionals. And they like, "Oh, maybe we'll start simple." Good idea. Start simple.
Exactly.
And if anyone listening has never done this and is thinking about it, read the fine print. The hotel, conference center, catering facility, equipment rental people, read all the fine print. That 22% service charge can kind of put a ding in your budget.
That it can, and it always comes out of nowhere too, because it's never in the quote.
Right. Somewhere else it said on the website they have a 22% service charge, and I've seen those anywhere from 18 to 25. So anyway, that's part of what I do. I talk about the B-sides ethos and a little history and what the rules are, and then kind of get a gauge for how well they know B-sides, how well they know event management, event planning, and then if they're doing it, I've advised a handful of folks on the 501c3 stuff. But we talk about, but it's the B-sides are decentralized. Do what makes sense for you. There have been B-sides and events where you need the government's permission to do them. There have been B-sides events where, they have pretty amazing after parties. There have been events where, let's just say the gathering after B-sides in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia will be a little different than the gathering we have after B-sides in Las Vegas.
I think you might be onto something.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's going to serve the community of Riyadh in a way that they need. Just don't, it's part of the reason we keep the rules as relaxed as we can, because it should work for you. If you tried to do I'm not going to name names. If you try to do, one of the conference series that has a lot of rules, it's going to be hard for somebody in Yangon, Myanmar, to pull this off with their, cultural and social and government what the world looks like there. It's different.
Yeah.
It turns out the whole world isn't a Holiday Inn Express in the United States.
Yeah, exactly. It's you have to have your finger on the pulse of the community to understand why everything is the way that it is in places that are not here.
Right. Yeah.
And as someone who has their finger on the pulse of the community, Jack, I was wondering, I mean, for people that are kind of looking at this from the outside, I mean, are you seeing any issues in the security community now that should be addressed? I mean, are there any things that are kind of standing out to you as something that we need to take a look at and say, hey, let's get this fixed because this is keeping people out of our community?
Yeah, and I don't want to get overly political, but the entire political and social climate has polarized people, and it's made it harder to have nuanced conversations. It's had harder. It's becoming more and more difficult to have conversations with people that you disagree with.
Yeah.
The nature of security at this point in time, technology changes so fast, and the security implications of that. Every time we have new technology, we have to relearn everything we've known since the first two computers were connected by a wire. Apparently, because we have a hard time remembering things. It's part of why I've started the Shoulders of InfoSec project. But we need people. There's too much to know, and so if we don't share ideas, we're in a bad place securing things. And if we're not able to share ideas with people we disagree with, we're there. And much like has happened with politics and in some social issues, people have become polarized and hardened in the extremes. And I see more and more of that. And it certainly plays out in social media, in InfoSec, and that's really unfortunate. And that's not exclusively the fault of the hacker community or the InfoSec community. Social media platforms have become a lot more people are in there, and a lot more people who aren't nice are on there, and the algorithms they use to manage that and the ideas they use to manage that are less than ideal. I'll be diplomatic here, but they're not doing a great job. And it truly saddens me. B-sides exist because of Twitter. The initial conversations happened on Twitter. 2009 was a year that a lot of the hacker and security community came together on Twitter. Jen Leggio made a list of people, shared it on a website or a blog, as I recall. And I remember when, there were like 50 or 60 of us, and then there were 100. And it turned out that, in Boston, there were a handful of us that stayed in touch between BeanSec meetups on Twitter. And it turned out that was true all across the US. And then we found it as it expanded. And so we all got together. So later that year, these conversations happened on Twitter, and then they broke off of Twitter to other things. And then a B-sides happened out of it. And early B-sides, and some today still do things like post all of the talks and then you vote on them via Twitter, and you do public voting. We did a lot of things on Twitter, and that was when it was really a realm for tech people and almost exclusively technically savvy people, and podcast, social media people, and the security industry has a good overlap with that. So we jumped in there. Now 8 years ago I would have advised new people to jump on Twitter, and now I can't really do that because it's a mess, and I don't have a good solution for it other than focus on the people that you can have a conversation with. Right before this, I had a conversation with someone whose life is extremely different and his worldview is therefore extremely different. And at one point in time, we kind of looked at each other, and he said at first, it's like, I can't even have these conversations with most people. And I'm like, yeah. It's like, I can't have these conversations with people who agree with me. It's, so that's a long way of saying, yeah, man, we got to, if we have to work together, or the community is not served well. And if the community is not served well in something as dynamic as cybersecurity, or even the more hobbyist hacker side of things, if we're not sharing information, we're lost. We're truly lost. People talk about being self-trained, self-taught, but there's a lot of self-teaching. There's a lot of self-learning, autodidacts, if you must. But there are always people to give you a little nudge when you get stuck. And we're losing that, and that's a real problem. And like I said, not just for InfoSec, not just for cybersecurity, not just for the hacker crowd, but for society at large.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a common problem that we see across a lot
Right.
of
You don't have
verticals.
to agree. You don't have to agree.
Yeah.
And you don't have to give voice to people that are just plain wrong or destructive. But most people aren't on those extremes, but they end up pushed to taking those positions.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of which, because you kind of said that, you said if someone was just kind of starting out, maybe you might want to steer them away from Twitter for the time being because of kind of the
Yeah.
connotations. Where would you steer them? What would you say?
What I would probably do if I had time to is go to Twitter, but be really careful who you follow and be careful who you engage with. Watch the people that engage. Watch the people. They're folks that are engaging and share information. There are others. I used to do a lot. A lot of my Twitter feed used to be ranting about Boston area commuting and the nightmares of network security. And that's evolved over time dramatically. And now I'm much, like happens to all of us, I'm much less technical than I used to be. And the technical
Mhm.
stuff I do tends to be tied very specifically to a couple of specific projects, which, if I talk about them, sound way more commercial and corporate than I want to talk about. It's what we do at work. It's the technology that's been donated to B-sides. These are the technical issues that I dig into. And then some of the technical issues are related to community things, community events, where I don't want to offend the hotel or conference center, or I don't want to publicly ridicule bad behavior of people in the community who are just learning. So, my feed is more comedy than anything else. But you find the people that don't go on the attack. You find the people that engage, or you find the people who are just broadcasting information. There are a lot of people that use Twitter as a broadcast medium now,
Mhm.
and find what works, and just don't. It's like, don't read the comics. Facebook is not a great place for infosec news. Um, there are a handful of podcasts, they're video casts, they're conferences. Obviously, I'm a big fan of going to your local B-sides. It's much more important if you're in Jackson, Mississippi. It's a lot more important for you, I think, to go to B-sides or some other, smaller regional conference in Jackson, and maybe, work your way up to go into New Orleans, or across to Huntsville, or one of the others in the region, because what you're going to do is meet people fighting the same battles of the same, and in Mississippi and Alabama, you're going to be fighting the prejudice of Northern people about Southern folk. And people that don't know the South really don't understand. You're going to be finding people who have similar interests. And if you're in a place like Huntsville, Alabama, you're going to be dealing with other government contractors. You're going to be dealing with people in the aerospace industry. So you're going to have a common ground. I'm not trying to discourage people from getting to ShmooCon or DEF CON or B-Sides Vegas or RSA or any of those, but the local events, whether it's ISSA or your 2600 meetup or DEF CON or an ICE, those local events, give them a try. Find the ones that you click with, because those people, I mean, that's my path. I joined a couple small network user group in Providence, Rhode Island when I lived up north, and learned a lot from the guys that have been doing it for a while. I got thrown into technology a long time ago. It was a NetWare user group, to give you an idea how long ago. And then once I started running into things and solving problems, I shared it. Like, hey, I ran into this. Anybody else seen it? And somebody was like, yeah, I'm still fighting that. It's like, I figured it out. You're not going to believe this. And that was when you opened the crate of floppy disks that were TechNet, or I guess it was CDs by then. Your TechNet, long rest in peace. But and you'd share an idea, and then that goes on to I rolled out Exchange 2000. Let me tell you what I ran into, and you do a full presentation, and people start sharing, and people start knowing your name, and you're like, oh, he's a good guy, or that woman knows her stuff. I saw her give a talk about the non-classified part of how they do defenses at Hanscom Air Force Base. It's like, and it cleared, but it's like, wow, she knows her stuff. And then
Mhm.
what happens beyond that is, and this is what we really drive for in B-Sides. One of the things we really drive for is, the next thing you know, the community's stronger. People know each other. It's pulled together tighter. And you also know who's hiring, who's good to work for, who's not good to work for. And you think, like, I need somebody that understands this Kubernetes nonsense, and like, oh, who gave that talk? Let's ping them, see if they are available or if they know somebody. And
Yeah.
when you do community right, you do that. And the one thing I'll say is, no matter what you're doing, like they told you in grade school, show your work. Whether that's blogging or video blogging or your GitHub repo or whatever it is, make it possible for people to see what you've done, see how what you've done in the field, plus also what you've done to give back to the field. A lot of people get upset at the popularity of giving conference talks. If you're doing it just to give talks, if you're doing it for ego, don't bother. If you're doing it because you want to hone your communication skills, you want to be a better communicator, that you're a technical person, but you're not a great communicator, you want to be able to deliver a message effectively inside your organization or to your customers, that's a great reason. If you have learned stuff from other people and want to pay back because you've learned some cool stuff and you want to show your tricks because you're proud of what you've done, that's an awesome reason. If you're doing it for your ego, just save us all some time, but show your work, and then people know who you are. It's easy to figure it out. Hiring managers will go and see and oh, well, this is somebody that's able to communicate.
Yeah, and I'd like to think that as someone else who helps build communities, I mean, Tech Field Day has been a vibrant community now for almost 10 years, and we followed all your great advice. We built a great community. We showed our work. I mean, we have a YouTube channel and all these kinds of things. So, I mean, if you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, you can head over to our website at techfieldday.com, where and you definitely want to click on the link for Security Field Day, because we've got a great lineup of people that are going to be there. Jack and I had talked about this. The scheduling didn't quite work out to have you at this one, but we hope to have you at one in the future. But we're going to have folks, like Wolfgang Gerlich's going to be there. We just invited a couple of great new security folks from overseas. Zoe Rose, who's someone I met about 4 years ago.
Wolf is fantastic. Zoe, I just adore her. I've spent a lot of time with her in London in June. So yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and we've got some great new announcements that'll probably be coming out first part of next week. Some great delegates, some
awesome.
Companies are going to be presenting, like Cisco and CyberArk. We're excited to see them, and that's December 12th, 13th, and 14th. So be sure you tune in. And if you are a person who's not on Twitter, make a Twitter account and check out the website, because we'll be using the hashtag XFD1. Seems the storage guys took S from us, but X is cool, right?
Yep.
XFD1. And you can join the conversation. Honestly, that's a great way to kind of get involved in the security community, is kind of joining a conversation that is good, has a lot of good technical merit, and then see where things go from there. All right. Well, Jack, thank you for your time today. I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. A lot of great wisdom for the people out there. If people want to learn a little bit more about Security B-Sides, where can they go to check that out?
Just head over to securitybsides.org. That's our big ugly wiki, and there's information on all sorts of things. There's a Google Calendar embedded there if you want to keep track. There are links to a lot of the events there. But start out at securitybsides.org, and there's a ton of information there. And if you get stuck trying to find something out, info@securitybsides.org, drop us a line, and one of us on the core team will try to steer you in the right direction.
All right. And if you want to learn a little bit more about what we do here at Gestalt IT and Tech Field Day, you can always check us out at gestaltit.com, where we're going to have articles, video interviews, podcasts, a whole bunch of great media to consume. And if you are interested in becoming a part of Tech Field Day, head over to that website, techfieldday.com. We have a delegate sign-up form if you want to be one of the people around the table asking questions. If you're interested in presenting at an event, whether it be networking, security, storage, or wireless, we have a great opportunity for you to present there. So for this Friday, Jack Daniel, for the rest of the Security B-Sides team, for Tom Hollingsworth and the people here at Gestalt IT, I'm going to sign off, and I wish you all a happy weekend, and I look forward to seeing you out there in the community.